Greetings! The Texas Education Agency English Learner Support Division is eager to share revisions related to bilingual and English as a second language programming within the TSDS Texas Student Data Systems PEIMS Public Education Information Management System beginning with the 2019-2020 school year. During this video, we will discuss revisions within the LEP indicator codes, the parental permission codes, the program codes related to bilingual and ESL programs with new alternative language program coding. We'll discuss pre-kindergarten and early education as it relates to English learners, and we'll discuss changes to the Texas Records Exchange and the Home Language Survey. Let's begin by looking at the LEP indicator codes. We'll start by looking at some of the terminology used within these revisions. English learner, EL, a student who is in the process of acquiring English and has another language as the primary language. This is synonymous with English language learner, ELL, and limited English proficient, or LEP, LEP. You will notice within the coding revisions that the term of LEP has been bridged with the term EL. This is because LEP, Limited English Proficient, is still utilized within the Texas Education Code, Section 29, whereas English Learner, EL, is utilized within the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 89, Subchapter BB. These two terms are being bridged to show the correlation between the two terms as we move towards utilizing the term of English Learner. Likewise, the term of English Proficient has been introduced within the PEIMS revisions. An English Proficient student is a student who has met reclassification criteria and is no longer identified as an English learner. This term is synonymous with non-EL, non-ELL, and non-LEP. You will notice within the revisions that non-LEP has been bridged with the term of EP. So you will see non-LEP /EP to indicate students who have met reclassification criteria and are no longer English learners. Let's talk about that process a little bit more with two terms that have been defined more clearly within the PEIMS standards related to bilingual and ESL programming. Reclassification and exit. Reclassification is the process by which the Language Proficiency Assessment Committee, or the LPAC, determines that an English learner has met the appropriate criteria to be classified as English Proficient, EP. Whereas exit is the point at which an English learner has met reclassification criteria and no longer requires bilingual or ESL program services, and the student exits the program with parental approval. So distinctly, we can see the difference between reclassification and exit as two steps. Reclassification when the student meets the criteria set by the state to be coded as English Proficient, whereas exit being the point at which the student is no longer in program services and exits with parental approval. Let's dive into this concept a little bit further by taking a look at this analogy so that we can see the relationship a little bit more clearly between reclassification and exit and how these terms are utilized. We can read this analogy like so. Identification is to reclassification as placement is to exit. So the LPAC, the Language Proficiency Assessment Committee, has the responsibility to appropriately identify a student as an English learner and to then reclassify the student as English Proficient when the student has met the appropriate criteria. So based on the state's criteria for identification and reclassification, the LPAC determines the point at which a student has been identified as an English learner and the point at which the student has been met reclassification as English Proficient. On the other side, we take a look at the steps of placement and exit. The LPAC's role in placement and exit is to recommend to the parents placement within the bilingual or ESL program and the point at which the student is ready to exit bilingual or ESL program services. However, the difference between identification and reclassification and placement and exit is that for placement and exit, the role of the parent is vital. We must have parental approval to both place a student in a bilingual or ESL program and also to exit the student from a bilingual or ESL program. So here within this analogy, we can clearly see the distinction between the processes of identification and reclassification and placement and exit. One new exciting code that has been added to the LEP indicator is this term of former LEP/EL, former limited English proficient / English learner. This is defined as a student who has previously been identified as an English learner, has met reclassification criteria, and has completed 4 years of monitoring. The student continues with this status through the remainder of his or her school years in Texas and is not eligible for the Bilingual Education Allotment BEA funding due to the fact that he or she is not identified as LEP/English learner. So you will notice within the new updated LEP indicator code, the addition of former LEP/EL comes after the 4 years of monitoring. We'll take a look at this a little bit more closely as we look at some resources that have been developed to show this process as we finish the 4 years of monitoring and then go into the former LEP/EL status, which again will remain with the student through the remainder of his or her schooling in Texas. But keep in mind, these students are not English learners. As they met reclassification and went through their years of monitoring, they are no longer English learners, which means, again, they are not eligible for BEA funding. So why has this code been added? Well, the addition of this new former LEP/EL code is to facilitate the data collection to track long-term success of students formerly classified as English learners in Texas public schools. By adding in the former LEP/EL code, we're able to see how individual students progress after exiting program services and after their years of monitoring. Additionally, we're able to track the overall progress of our bilingual and ESL programs at the campus level, the district level, and across the regions and the state. We are excited to add this new code, as this is also the direction that the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is highly encouraging states to track this progress of our English learners over periods of time and after reclassification and monitoring. So we are excited that Texas is at the forefront of adding in this new and exciting code. It's important to note that this code begins in the 1920 school year. This is not retroactive. So in the 1920 school year, the first students who will be utilizing this code of former LEP/EL will be students who in the 2018-19 school year have been a monitor year 4. So that is a LEP indicator 4. They will move in the 1920 school year to code 5. Keep in mind, although code 5 is the number 5, it does not indicate 5 years, because that code will remain with them throughout the remainder of their years in Texas public schools. But again, this is not retroactive action and will only begin in the 1920 school year for students in the 18-19 school year who were coded as monitor year 4. Will now be the first students to move into our former LEP/EL code of LEP indicator 5. Now let's take a look at the parental permission code updates. We will notice that within the updates, there is a distinct difference between a parental request versus parental approval of program participation. Let's take a look at these 3 particular parental permission codes. Code 3 is defined as a parent or parent or guardian has requested placement of a non-LEP EP, non-LEP English proficient student in a bilingual program. So this would mean that the student has not ever been identified as an English learner. When a student has never been identified as an English learner and the parent requests placement of the student in a bilingual program, Parental Permission Code 3 is utilized. Whereas, or likewise, when a parent has requested placement of a non-LEP English proficient student in the ESL program, the Parental Permission Code of H is utilized. Again, for Code H, these are for students that have never been identified as English learners, and the parent is requesting placement of the student, the non-LEP English proficient student, in the ESL program. Code G, however, is utilized when the parent or guardian has approved the placement of a reclassified English proficient student in a bilingual or ESL program. So, Code G would be utilized when a student has been identified as an English learner, has then met reclassification, but the parent is approving continuation in a bilingual or ESL program for that student who is reclassified as English proficient after being coded as an English learner. You will notice previously this code had the word of recent, and that was deleted so that the student can continue utilizing Code G for as long as the student continues in a bilingual or ESL program after reclassification as English proficient. Now let's take a look at some exciting updates to the ESL parental permission codes. Previously, or currently, before the 1920 school year, there had been multiple codes for ESL parental permission. Code B for pre-K through 8 is no longer available. This code has been deleted. Code F for grades 9 through 12 has also been deleted. Now we have a new one parental permission code, and that is code K. Now notice here that this indicates pre-K to 12. However, this includes pre-K would also include students coded as EE. And we will discuss this a little bit later within the video. So no longer will we have code B or code F, but we have aligned the parental permission codes for English as a Second Language programming with Chapter 89, Subchapter BB. And now new code K will be for all English learners participating in a ESL program at any grade level. Let's take a look at the parental permission codes related to a bilingual education exception and an ESL waiver. These codes have not changed, but the definitions have been revised to align with each other and also to align with Chapter 89, Subchapter BB of the Texas Administrative Code. Code E is still utilized for the point at which the parent or guardian has approved placement of a LEP English learner student in the bilingual program, but the district is implementing an alternative language program approved by the Texas Education Agency due to the district's submission of a bilingual education exception for the current school year. Likewise, Code J is still utilized for when a parent or guardian has approved the placement of a LEP EL in the ESL program, but the district is implementing an alternative language program approved by the Texas Education Agency due to the district's submission of an ESL waiver for the current school year. In a little bit, we will take a look a little bit more at this alternative language program and what that means as we look at the program coding. But now, these parental permission codes will have a program code that relates to these parental permission codes. When a student is in a bilingual program or an ESL program, that the district is under either a bilingual education exception or an ESL waiver and administering an alternative language program that they have outlined in their bilingual education exception or ESL waiver application. So let's dive into those program codes. Overall, there have been updates to the bilingual and ESL program coding to align with Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 89, specifically Section 1210, which defines these programs. They have now included the definition of the program model for bilingual in all 4 bilingual education programs and both of the ESL programs, to add the definition of the program model, the certification information of the teachers, the program goals, and the instructional design. Keep in mind again that the ESL program codes, as we mentioned previously, now apply in all grade levels. And when it indicates pre-kindergarten through grade 12, pre-kindergarten would also include, under that umbrella, students in EE, early education. Now, we have updated and added a new field in our programming, which is alternative language programs. Alternative language program codes align to the parental permission codes for students whose parents have approved a bilingual or ESL program, but the district has submitted a bilingual education exception or ESL waiver to administer an alternative language program for the current school year. The alternative language program codes can only be utilized if a district has submitted a bilingual education exception or ESL waiver. Parental permission code E, for instance, when the parent has approved a bilingual program, but the district has submitted a bilingual education exception, will now generate a program coding of alternative language program code 01. Notice that when a new code is created, there are 2 digits, so it is 01 for the bilingual alternative language code, alternative language program code. When a parental permission code is J, as in the parent has approved an ESL program placement, but the district has submitted an ESL waiver and is under an alternative language program, the alternative language program code 02 will be utilized to align with code J. Again, alternative language program codes can only be utilized if the district has submitted their bilingual education exception or ESL waiver. This alternative language program is outlined when the district submits their bilingual education exception or ESL waiver. To highlight what is meant by the alternative language program, we're going to take a look briefly at the information provided within the bilingual education exception ESL waiver application information. So one of the resources for instance, a bilingual education exception instructions outlines, and we can scroll down to the part within the application that talks about instructional design. And this is similar when filing an ESL waiver. In the instructional design section, the district must appropriately choose what instructional design and method of delivery will be utilized for these students. This is defining the district's alternative language program. So for an alternative language program for a bilingual education exception, the choices here are ESL content-based program model, which would align with all of the requirements outlined for ESL content-based program, ESL pull-out program model, again aligning to Section 1210 of the Texas Administrative Code for an ESL pull-out program, or if the district does not have the appropriately certified teachers for the bilingual education program and does not have the appropriately certified teachers to administer one of the 2 state-approved ESL program models. Other alternative language programs may include content-based sheltered instruction, as in all of the content teachers of English learners are trained and implementing sheltered instruction, or at a minimum, sheltered English, meaning that at a very minimum, the English language arts and reading teachers have been trained in sheltered instruction and are monitoring of their implementation. So, for instance, these are the types of alternative language programs that would be utilized when submitting, in this case, a bilingual education exception. A district may be doing other measures above these 4 choices they may be adding. And so here there's also an area for the district to add in additional descriptions of their alternative language program. So when administering an alternative language program, what is that program? It is exactly what the district has outlined here within their bilingual education exception application. So now we see that when a parental permission code of E or J is utilized, noting that the parent has approved a bilingual or ESL program, but the district is under bilingual education exception or ESL waiver, these parental permission codes will now align with program codes that are actually related to what the student is receiving in the classroom, which is the alternative language program code to bilingual program or the ESL program as stated in the district's bilingual education exception or ESL waiver application. Now let's discuss briefly pre-kindergarten and early education as it relates to English learners. For any student enrolling in a 3- or 4-year-old program, a home language survey or HLS shall be administered and the state process followed for identification as English learner, LEP-EL, as appropriate. Here, as appropriate means that if the HLS indicates English, as in both questions are answered with the result of English and no other language is listed on either of the 2 required questions, then the process would be completed at that point. However, if a language other than English is listed for either of the 2 questions, the required questions on the home language survey, then the appropriate process would be followed. This includes students with or without identified disabilities. So whether or not the student has been identified as having disabilities, the student who is enrolling in school to generate ADA, enrolling in school in a 3-year-old program or a 4-year-old program, the home language survey is administered and the appropriate state process for identification is followed. English learners qualify for pre-kindergarten by the nature of being identified as an English learner automatically qualifies them for pre-kindergarten. However, ELs may be coded as EE, early education, based on special education services in conjunction with their language program services. Formerly, there was a PEIMS fatal error occurred for ELs in EE. This error has been corrected through these PEIMS revisions effective for the 2019-2020 school year. So you will notice really through the revisions, particularly related to ESL programming, there had been some rules, some back-end rules that had prevented English learners to be coded as in EE. This problem now has been corrected so that any student enrolling in a 3- or 4-year-old program, the district can follow the appropriate process, identify the student as an English learner, and either code the student as EE or PK based on the coordination between the ARD and the LPAC. For more information on the distinction between the terms of PK, EE, PPCT, there is some information in the TEA Early Childhood FAQ that is linked here. Lastly, we'll take a look at the Texas Records Exchange and the Home Language Survey. There are now new fields within the Home Language Survey data within TREX. The date of the original HLS recorded in TREX and the student language from the original HLS recorded in TREX. These are now new fields. They are not required fields, but they are now added in order to transmit this important information. What is the purpose? This supports the transmission of this key data in the English learner identification process, particularly as a student moves from one Texas district to another. And it supports the one-time identification of ELs upon initial enrollment in Texas public schools. The more information that can be provided from the original home language survey from its students' initial enrollment in Texas public schools, the more we can ensure that students are being only identified one time in their Texas education career, and that that identification is followed through the duration of their career in Texas. We do have some new resources that are available to support the understanding of these changes. So let's take a look. First, kind of at a high level view here, you can see an updated LEP-EL decision chart for the LPAC. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see now this has been updated as a student initially enrolls in Texas public schools and goes through the identification process, and the LPAC placing them, recommending placement in a program in the parental approval process. So all of this, this flow chart helps to understand this process with all of the updated PEIMS revision codes. You'll notice at the very bottom, the labels, the code for what the different PEIMS codes are down here at the bottom as they're indicated throughout the flow chart. Another resource that's been developed to assist in understanding how to utilize the new coding is this code guide for Bilingual and ESL Program Association. Now, it looks like a lot, but don't be overwhelmed. It has a lot of detail here to show. Let's look here, sorry for the zooming. All right, you can see here, you'll have a student description, the timing as in, what does this look like? Year 1, 2, 3, as the students are classified, as they go through monitoring, etc. What does this look like? What is the LEP indicator code, the parental permission code, bilingual program code, ESL program code, alternative language program code, and does the student qualify for the bilingual education allotment? Is this student funded? So it begins here with English proficient students who have never been identified as English proficient, and it walks through all of the scenarios related to these students and how they would be coded. Then it moves on to our LEP-EL student who has with the parental denial of all program services. What does this look like as they go through the process? It then discusses a LEP-EL student with a parental denial of bilingual programs but has accepted ESL program services. Kind of goes through that process, and this includes whether the district has filed for a bilingual education exception, ESL waiver. All of that is indicated here in the student description. We get into then that the LEP-EL student served in a bilingual program with parental permission, and all of the scenarios related to that, whether or not this district is providing the appropriate bilingual program or not, or has submitted a bilingual education exception. We go into the LEP-EL student served in an ESL program with parental permission, again, whether the district has submitted an ESL waiver or not. At the very bottom, you will see the key for some of the program coding that is utilized throughout this document. Hopefully, these new resources will benefit you as you administer these new program codes, parent permission codes, LEP indicator codes. As you're implementing these new codes, we hope that these resources will benefit you in understanding their association and how to utilize them. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about these updates to the TSDS PEIMS revisions related to bilingual and ESL programming. If you have any further questions or need for clarity, please contact the Texas Education Agency English Learner Support Division at English learner support at tea.texas.gov, and we'll be happy to assist you. Thank you so much, and have a great day.